The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched far beyond what human eyes could see. Massive pillars made of crystal rose toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Jake Morrison stood at the center of it all, his simple black suit looking plain next to the colorful robes and strange forms of the alien delegates around him. Behind him, Admiral Lisa Carter and General Pete Hansen waited in silence, their faces showing nothing of what they felt inside. Council Prime Zethkar floated above them all, his body made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in sharp beams. When he spoke, his voice filled the enormous room like thunder rolling across mountains. The translator devices that every being wore turned his words into something Jake could understand, but the cold tone needed no translation. "The human delegation will listen," Zethkar announced. "The Council has made its decision regarding the colonies of New Montana and Haven Ridge." Jake had known this moment would come. For 30 years, humanity had served the Galactic Council. Human soldiers died on distant worlds fighting wars they had never started. Human engineers built the ships and stations that kept galactic civilization running. Human doctors saved alien lives in hospitals across the galaxy. Human teachers educated alien children in schools that humans had designed and built. In return, the Council gave humanity a small voice in galactic affairs and the promise of protection. But Jake knew the truth that few humans dared to speak out loud. They were not partners in this grand alliance. They were tools to be used and discarded when convenient. "The resources of these colonies are required for the war effort," Zethkar continued. "The mining operations must be expanded immediately. The human population will be relocated to more suitable locations where they can contribute to the greater good of the galaxy." Jake listened as Zethkar described the fate awaiting 10 million human civilians. They would be moved to asteroid mining stations in deep space. Their children would grow up in artificial gravity wells with recycled air and processed food. Their homes and farms and the communities they had spent generations building would be stripped bare to feed the Council's war machine. The war against the Void Hunters had been going on for 5 years now. It was the Council's war, started when they tried to claim territory that the Void Hunters considered sacred. But as always, human soldiers did most of the dying, while alien politicians made speeches about sacrifice and duty. Admiral Carter shifted slightly behind Jake. He knew what she was thinking because he was thinking the same thing. How many more times would they be asked to give up everything for aliens who saw them as nothing more than useful servants? How many more human colonies would be sacrificed? How many more human soldiers would die for causes that meant nothing to Earth? The other alien delegates watched Jake with the same expression they always wore when dealing with humans. They looked at him like a pet that might need to be scolded if it misbehaved. The Altarians with their blue skin and large eyes nodded along with everything Zethkar said. The insect-like Zephyrians clicked their approval. The gas-based ethereals pulsed with colors that Jake had learned meant satisfaction. None of them questioned the decision. None of them suggested that maybe, just maybe, asking 10 million humans to abandon their homes for the 3rd time in a decade might be unreasonable. They simply accepted that human sacrifice was the price of keeping their own world safe and comfortable. Jake thought about the reports that crossed his desk every day. Human casualties in the war zones were running at 3 times the rate of any alien species. Human colonies were always the first to be asked for resources when the Council needed something. Human families were the ones who received the death notices when another battle went badly. And what did humanity get in return? They got to sit in this beautiful hall and listen to aliens decide their fate. They got the privilege of serving the greater good of the galaxy. They got to be grateful for the opportunity to die for civilizations that would never do the same for them. Carr finished his announcement and looked down at Jake with those crystal eyes that reflected light but showed no warmth. "Does the human delegation have any response to the Council's decision?" This was the moment Jake had been preparing for without knowing it. For months, he had been receiving secret communications from human leaders across the galaxy, quiet conversations about how long they could continue this way, careful discussions about what humanity really owed to the Council that treated them like servants. The answer, they had concluded, was nothing. Jake looked up at the floating crystal being who had just condemned 10 million humans to life in asteroid prisons. He thought about all the times humans had been asked to sacrifice for the greater good. All the times they had been told that their suffering was necessary for galactic peace. all the times they had been expected to smile and nod and be grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. Behind him, Admiral Carter and General Hansen waited for his response. Around him, hundreds of alien delegates expected him to argue or plead or negotiate. They expected him to ask for more time or better conditions or some small mercy that they could graciously grant, to show how reasonable they were. Instead, Jake simply nodded his head once. "We understand," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the vast hall. "Good day, Council." He turned and walked toward the exit without waiting for permission to leave. Admiral Carter and General Hansen fell into step behind him. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence that filled the hall. The alien delegates watched in confusion as the human delegation simply left. In 30 years of service to the Council, no human representative had ever walked away from a meeting like this. They always stayed to argue the details or beg for modifications or at least show some emotion about the decisions that would destroy human lives. But Jake Morrison was done arguing. As he walked through the crystal corridors of the Council building toward his ship, he activated his personal communicator and sent a single coded message to every human leader in the galaxy. The message was simple and would be understood by everyone who received it. The time for service was over. The time for independence had begun. The message that Jake Morrison sent reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. It was not written in words that aliens could understand if they intercepted it. Instead, it was a series of numbers that meant nothing to anyone except the humans who had been waiting for this day. The numbers referred to pages and lines in a book that every human child learned in school, a book about freedom and the right to choose your own destiny. Dr. Amy Foster was working late in her laboratory on Kepler Research Station when her communicator chimed softly. She looked at the numbers on her screen and felt her heart begin to race. For 3 years, she had been part of the secret network of human leaders who had been planning for this moment. She had helped design the systems that would allow humanity to disappear from galactic civilization without causing immediate chaos. Amy walked through the corridors of the research station, looking at the work that had consumed her life for the past decade. The quantum computers that could process information faster than anything the aliens had ever imagined. The biological synthesizers that could create medicines and foods from basic elements. The fusion reactors that provided clean energy for entire star systems. All of it designed by human minds and built by human hands. The aliens who worked alongside her had no idea how any of it really functioned. They could operate the controls and read the displays, but they had never learned the deep science that made it all possible. The Council had always been content to let humans do the difficult thinking, while aliens enjoyed the benefits. Amy began sending messages to every human on the station. The messages looked like routine maintenance requests, but the humans knew what they really meant. It was time to go home. Within 6 hours, the humans began packing their personal belongings and preparing to leave. The same thing was happening on thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Human settlements received the coded signal and began the process they had been secretly planning for years. It was not a panicked evacuation or a dramatic rebellion. It was a quiet, organized withdrawal that would leave no trace of violence or destruction. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as human ships throughout the fleet received their new orders. For 30 years, human military forces had been spread across the galaxy, protecting alien worlds and fighting alien wars. They had bases on hostile planets, patrol ships in dangerous sectors, and garrison forces on peaceful worlds that had grown comfortable under human protection. Now it was time for all of them to come home. The withdrawal began with the most distant outposts. Human soldiers and officers packed their equipment and boarded transport ships without explanation. When alien commanders asked where they were going, the humans gave polite but vague answers about reassignment and new orders. No one mentioned that the reassignment was permanent, and the new orders were to abandon the galaxy to its own devices. General Pete Hansen coordinated the movement of ground forces from his command center on Earth's moon. His screens showed the positions of human military units scattered across hundreds of worlds. One by one, those positions went dark as the units completed their withdrawal and began the journey home. The aliens noticed, of course. They sent messages asking about the unusual movement of human forces. They demanded explanations for why critical positions were being abandoned. They ordered human commanders to report to alien authorities and justify their actions. The humans responded with the same polite confusion they had perfected over decades of service. They claimed to be following routine orders from Earth. They said there must be some misunderstanding that would be cleared up soon. They promised to look into the matter and provide clarification as soon as possible. But the clarification never came, and more humans disappeared every day. On the mining world of Titan 7, Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan oversaw the shutdown of the massive extraction facility that provided rare metals for the entire sector. The alien overseers watched in growing panic as human technicians methodically powered down systems that they had never learned to operate independently. "What are you doing?" demanded the Altarian supervisor, his blue skin turning darker with stress. "These systems must remain operational. The production schedules cannot be interrupted." Kate looked at him with the same patient expression she had worn for 8 years of working under alien management. "I'm sorry, but we've received orders to return to Earth for reassignment. I'm sure the transition team will have everything running again soon." But there was no transition team. The aliens had always assumed that the complex machinery would continue running because it always had. They had never bothered to learn how it worked or how to fix it when things went wrong. They had been content to let humans handle the technical details while they managed the profits. Dr. Ryan Clark was packing his research when his alien assistant found him. The young ethereal was pulsing with colors that indicated extreme distress. "Dr. Clark, you cannot leave now. The Andromedan fever outbreak is spreading faster than our models predicted. Without your expertise, millions will die." Ryan had spent 15 years developing treatments for diseases that only affected alien species. He had saved more alien lives than he could count, working endless hours in laboratories while alien administrators took credit for his discoveries. He had trained alien doctors and researchers, but he had never shared the deepest secrets of his work. "I'm confident that your medical staff will find a solution," Ryan said as he sealed his cases. "You have all the equipment and most of the data. I'm sure you'll manage," but they would not manage, and Ryan knew it. The treatments he had developed required an understanding of biological systems that took decades to master. The aliens had learned to follow his procedures, but they had never learned to think like he did. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated itself thousands of times. Human doctors left alien hospitals. Human teachers abandoned alien schools. Human engineers departed from construction projects. Human researchers packed up their laboratories and headed for home. The aliens called it desertion and demanded explanations. They threatened consequences and promised rewards for staying. They begged and pleaded and offered deals that would have seemed generous just days before. But the humans were no longer listening to alien offers. They had served faithfully for 30 years and received nothing but demands for greater sacrifice. Now they were going home to build something better than the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months after the first human transport ships disappeared into the void beyond Council space, the galaxy began to understand what it had lost. The realization came slowly at first, like a fever that starts with small aches before consuming the entire body. Systems that had run smoothly for decades began to fail. Projects that had seemed simple became impossible. Wars that had been manageable turned into disasters. The void hunters struck first, sensing weakness like predators who smell blood in the water. Their black ships appeared without warning in the Outer Rim territories, moving faster and hitting harder than they ever had before. The alien fleets that moved to intercept them found themselves fighting an enemy they no longer understood. For 30 years, human tactical officers had planned the battles against the void hunters. Human strategists had analyzed enemy movements and predicted their attacks. Human soldiers had led the charges that broke enemy formations and won decisive victories. The aliens had provided ships and numbers, but humans had provided the intelligence that made those resources effective. Now the Council fleets moved like blind giants, powerful but clumsy. They had overwhelming firepower but no idea how to use it. They had sophisticated sensors but no understanding of what the data meant. They had experienced alien commanders who had learned to follow human advice but had never learned to think for themselves. Admiral Kethvor of the Third Fleet watched his formation fall apart, under a void hunter ambush that any human officer would have seen coming hours in advance. His ships fired wildly at targets they could barely track while enemy vessels darted between them like shadows. When the battle ended, he had lost 40% of his fleet without inflicting significant damage on the enemy. "Contact Earth Command," he ordered his communications officer, Request immediate tactical support. The response came back within minutes, transmitted from a relay station on the edge of human space. The message was brief and final. Earth Command is no longer available for tactical consultation. Please direct all military inquiries to Council Defense Command. But Council Defense Command had never existed as anything more than an administrative body. The real command structure had always been human officers working within alien fleets. When those officers left, they took with them not just their expertise but the entire framework that had held the galactic military together. The breakdown extended far beyond military affairs. On the industrial world of Mechanus Prime, the fusion reactors that powered the entire planet began experiencing cascade failures. Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan had designed these systems to be robust and reliable, but she had also built them to require human oversight. The alien technicians who remained tried desperately to understand the complex feedback loops and safety protocols that kept the reactors stable. Director Vostal, the Altarian administrator of the power grid, stood in the control room watching displays that meant nothing to him. Red warning lights flashed across dozens of screens while alien technicians pushed buttons and adjusted settings without understanding what they were doing. The reactors were still producing power, but the output was becoming increasingly unstable. Contact the Human Engineering Division, Vostal ordered. Tell them we need immediate assistance with reactor maintenance. But the Human Engineering Division no longer existed. The humans who had built and maintained these systems were somewhere beyond the edge of known space, building new lives free from alien demands. They had left behind detailed manuals and training materials, but understanding written instructions was not the same as having decades of hands-on experience. Within days, the first reactor suffered a containment breach. The explosion was contained by safety systems that Kate Sullivan had installed, but the blast knocked out power to half the planet. The remaining reactors, pushed beyond their designed limits to compensate, began showing signs of critical stress. Similar failures were cascading across the galaxy. Hospital ships lost their life support systems when alien medics could not maintain the complex filtration units that humans had designed. Communication networks went dark as relay stations failed without human technicians to perform routine maintenance. Trade routes collapsed when navigational computers malfunctioned and no one knew how to repair them. Dr. Amy Foster watched the chaos from her new laboratory on Earth's moon. The quantum computers she had left behind on Kepler Research Station had been running continuously for 3 years, processing data and maintaining connections for thousands of scientific projects across the galaxy. But quantum systems required constant calibration and adjustment, work that could only be done by people who understood the underlying physics. Her replacement, a brilliant ethereal scientist named Wisthara, had been sending increasingly desperate messages for weeks. The quantum computers were beginning to decohere, losing their ability to process information at superhuman speeds. Research projects that had taken days were now taking months. Discoveries that had seemed routine were becoming impossible. Dr. Foster, the latest message pleaded, the quantum processing matrix is showing signs of systematic failure. We have followed all the maintenance protocols, but something is still wrong. Please provide additional guidance on subsystem recalibration procedures. Amy deleted the message without responding. She had spent 15 years training alien scientists to work with quantum systems, sharing everything except the deepest insights that made her human intuition so effective. She had taught them to follow procedures, but she had never taught them to innovate when those procedures failed. The medical crisis was even worse. Human doctors had been the backbone of galactic healthcare for 30 years, not because they were the only intelligent species, but because they alone had developed treatments for the exotic diseases that affected alien biology. Dr. Ryan Clark's research had created cures for 17 different plagues that periodically swept through council space. Now those plagues were returning, and the alien doctors who remained had no idea how to stop them. They had the equipment Ryan had built and the medications he had synthesized, but they did not have the understanding that allowed him to adapt his treatments when new strains appeared. The Andromedan fever outbreak that had started on 3 worlds was now spreading to dozens of others. The standard treatment that alien doctors had learned to administer was proving ineffective against a mutated strain of the virus. They tried modifying the medication according to procedures Ryan had taught them, but their changes only made the situation worse. Dr. Savick, the lead researcher at the Central Medical Institute, stared at the latest casualty reports with growing despair. The death toll was climbing exponentially, and he had no idea how to stop it. He had sent dozens of messages to human medical facilities, offering unprecedented compensation for consultation services. The responses were all the same. Earth Medical Command is no longer available for consultation. Please direct all inquiries to Council Health Services. But Council Health Services had always been a bureaucratic body that distributed treatments developed by human researchers. Without those researchers, they had nothing to distribute except procedures that were rapidly becoming obsolete. As the months passed, the galaxy began to understand the true scope of their dependence on humanity. The humans had not just been workers and soldiers and technicians. They had been the invisible foundation that held galactic civilization together. They had solved the problems that no one else could solve and fixed the systems that no one else understood. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was beginning to collapse. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from galactic civilization, and the galaxy was dying. What had begun as isolated system failures had grown into a cascade of collapse that touched every corner of Council space. Entire star systems had gone dark, their populations fleeing in desperate refugee convoys toward regions that still had power and food. The mighty Galactic Council, which had once ruled over 10,000 worlds, now controlled barely 300. Council Prime Zethkar floated in the ruins of what had once been the Great Assembly Hall. The crystal pillars that had reached toward the stars were cracked and dim, their light failing as the power systems struggled to function without human maintenance. The floating platforms where alien delegates had once debated policy now served as emergency shelters for refugees from failed worlds. The reports that reached Zethkar each day painted a picture of accelerating disaster. The industrial worlds could no longer maintain their production quotas without human engineers. The agricultural colonies were experiencing crop failures because the soil enhancement systems had broken down. The mining operations had stopped entirely after a series of fatal accidents caused by equipment malfunctions. Most devastating of all, the war against the Void Hunters had become a rout. Without human tactical expertise, the Council fleets were being systematically destroyed. The aliens had learned to push buttons and follow procedures, but they had never learned to think like warriors. They moved their ships in predictable patterns and made strategic decisions based on outdated assumptions. The Void Hunters, sensing the weakness of their enemies, had abandoned their usual hit-and-run tactics in favor of massive assaults designed to capture territory. They were no longer content to raid and retreat. They wanted to claim the galaxy for themselves, and the Council forces seemed powerless to stop them. Admiral Kethfor stood on the bridge of his flagship, one of the few surviving vessels from the Third Fleet. Around him, alien officers struggled to coordinate defensive operations that would have been routine when human advisors were available. The tactical displays showed Void Hunter formations approaching their position, but no one could predict where the enemy would strike. "Contact Earth Command," Kethfor ordered for the 1,000th time. "Offer them full sovereignty over the Epsilon sector in exchange for immediate military assistance." The communications officer, a young Altarian who had barely graduated from the academy before the humans left, activated the long-range transmitters. The message went out across space, carrying desperate pleas and increasingly generous offers. The humans could have anything they wanted: territory, resources, political independence, if they would just return to help save the galaxy. The response came back within hours, transmitted through automated systems that spoke with mechanical precision. "Humanity is unavailable for military consultation. Please direct all requests to Council Defense Command." But Council Defense Command was a fiction that everyone pretended to believe. The real defense of the galaxy had always depended on human expertise, and when that expertise vanished, the defense collapsed with it. The aliens could man the guns and pilot the ships, but they could not fight a war. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, Chief Administrator Torwin watched his manufacturing centers shut down one by one. The assembly lines that had once produced starships and weapons for the entire sector were falling silent as their human-designed control systems failed. The alien workers who remained could still operate individual machines, but they had no understanding of how to coordinate the complex production processes that turned raw materials into finished goods, the fusion furnaces that powered the factories, had been running continuously for 15 years, maintained by human engineers who understood their intricate operating requirements. When those engineers left, they had provided detailed maintenance schedules and repair procedures. But the alien technicians who tried to follow those procedures discovered that written instructions could not replace years of experience and intuitive understanding. The first furnace failed during a routine maintenance cycle when alien technicians misaligned the magnetic containment field. The explosion destroyed half the factory complex and killed dozens of workers. The remaining furnaces were shut down as a safety precaution, but without them, the entire industrial infrastructure of the world ground to a halt. Similar disasters were occurring across the galaxy as alien societies tried to maintain technologies they had never truly understood. The humans had made it look easy, handling complex systems with casual confidence that masked decades of specialized training. The aliens had assumed that human expertise was just another commodity that could be replaced when necessary. Dr. Amy Foster monitored the collapse from her research facility on Europa, watching as the communication networks she had designed failed one by one. The quantum computers that had processed information for thousands of research projects were shutting down as their delicate operating parameters drifted beyond acceptable limits. Scientific progress across the galaxy had ground to a halt as alien researchers found themselves unable to perform calculations that had once been routine. The most desperate messages came from the medical centers scattered across council space. The Andromedan fever outbreak that had started 2 years earlier had mutated into something far worse. What had begun as a manageable epidemic had become a galaxy-spanning plague that was killing millions of aliens every month. Dr. Savek, the lead researcher at what remained of the Central Medical Institute, sent increasingly frantic communications to Earth. He offered personal fortunes, entire star systems, anything that might convince human doctors to return and share their expertise. His research teams had tried everything they could think of, but their treatments only seemed to make the plague stronger. Dr. Foster, his latest message began, "I am begging you to reconsider. The death toll is now approaching 1 billion beings across 17 worlds. We know we made mistakes in the past, but innocent people are dying because of decisions they had no part in making. Surely human compassion demands that you help us save lives." Amy deleted the message without reading it completely. She had seen similar pleas from thousands of alien researchers and administrators. They all made the same assumption, that humanity owed them assistance simply because they needed it. None of them seemed to understand that 30 years of exploitation and dismissal had consequences. The financial collapse was perhaps the most visible sign of the galaxy's decline. The economic systems that had sustained interstellar trade for centuries were breaking down as the technological infrastructure failed. Currencies that had been stable for generations were becoming worthless as governments lost their ability to maintain basic services. Refugee fleets crowded the space lanes, carrying billions of displaced beings toward regions that still had functioning life support and food production. But even the most stable worlds were beginning to feel the strain as their own systems started to fail. The cascade of collapse was accelerating and no one knew how to stop it. General Ben Taylor watched the chaos from his command center on Luna, analyzing intelligence reports that painted a picture of total civilizational breakdown. The aliens had built their society on foundations they did not understand, and when those foundations were removed, everything came crashing down. "Admiral Carter," he reported to his superior, "we're receiving approximately 10,000 requests for assistance per day. They're offering us complete control over entire sectors, unlimited access to alien resources, formal recognition of human supremacy. Whatever they think might convince us to return." Lisa Carter, now serving as Earth's Secretary of Defense, studied the reports with the same calm expression she had worn during her years of service to alien masters. Around them, the humans who had once served the galaxy were building something new and unprecedented. Free from alien demands and restrictions, they were developing technologies that made their previous innovations seem primitive. "Standard response, General," Carter said without looking up from her work. "Humanity is unavailable." The galaxy that had once dismissed human contributions as adequate support work was learning the difference between using technology and creating it. They were discovering that human intelligence was not just another resource to be exploited, but the foundation upon which their entire civilization had been built. And as the collapse accelerated and the death toll mounted, they began to understand the true price of their arrogance. 5 years had passed since humanity quietly walked away from galactic civilization, and the galaxy that remained barely deserved the name. Where once 10,000 worlds had thrived under the protection and guidance of the Galactic Council, now fewer than 50 systems maintained any semblance of organized government. The rest had either been conquered by the Void Hunters or abandoned by populations fleeing endless cascades of technological and social collapse. The final delegation arrived at Earth on a battered refugee transport that had once been the personal yacht of a council member. Its crystal hull was cracked and stained, its elegant curves marred by hasty repairs and jury-rigged systems. Inside, the surviving leaders of what had once been the most powerful government in the galaxy huddled together like refugees, which was exactly what they had become. Council Prime Zethkar led the delegation, though his title meant little now. His crystal body, which had once shone with inner light, was dull and fractured. Cracks ran through his structure like a spider web, and several pieces had broken off entirely. Beside him stood the remnants of the council leadership, Admiral Kethvor, his military uniform torn and stained with the ash of burned worlds, Dr. Savek, his research equipment reduced to a single handheld scanner that barely functioned, Director Vostal, representing industrial interests that no longer existed. They had come to Earth not as the proud rulers of a galactic empire, but as broken supplicants begging for salvation they no longer deserved. Their journey had taken them through the ruins of their former territory, past worlds where billions had died from plagues that human doctors could have cured, through systems where entire populations had frozen in the dark when fusion reactors failed without human engineers to maintain them. Jake Morrison met them in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Through the great windows behind his desk, they could see the Earth that humanity had built in their absence. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the planet like jeweled rings, each one larger than the greatest space stations the Council had ever constructed. Ships moved between them in perfect coordination, their hulls gleaming with materials that seemed to bend light itself. The technology visible through those windows was beyond anything the aliens had ever imagined. In 5 years of independence, humanity had advanced further than the rest of the galaxy had managed in centuries. Free from the demands of alien masters, human genius had flourished in ways that made their previous achievements seem like the work of children. Jake wore the same simple black suit he had favored during his years as an ambassador, but everything else had changed. His office was elegant but not ostentatious, filled with art and books that spoke of a civilization confident in its own worth. Behind him stood Admiral Lisa Carter and General Pete Hansen, their uniforms bearing the insignia of Earth's new military forces. Zethkar approached Jake's desk with movements that spoke of pain and exhaustion. When he tried to speak, his voice cracked and wavered through the translator device he still wore. "Ambassador Morrison," he began, then stopped and corrected himself. "Secretary Morrison, we come before you as petitioners, not as representatives of a government that no longer exists." Jake listened with the same calm attention he had shown during countless council sessions. He did not offer chairs to his visitors, because most of them could not sit, and he did not offer refreshments because their species had different nutritional requirements. He simply waited for them to explain why they had come. "We acknowledge our mistakes," Zethkar continued, his voice growing stronger as he found the words he had rehearsed during the long journey to Earth. "We treated humanity as servants when you were partners. We demanded sacrifices from your people while protecting our own. We failed to recognize the value of what you contributed to our civilization." Admiral Kethvor stepped forward, his movement stiff with barely healed injuries from the final battles against the Void Hunters. "We offer unconditional surrender to human authority, complete reparations for any wrongs committed against your people, recognition of human supremacy in all matters of governance, technology, and military affairs." Dr. Savek, his body trembling, with the after effects of the plague that had ravaged his homeworld, added his own plea. "Billions have died from diseases that your doctors could have cured. Entire species are facing extinction because we were too proud to value human knowledge properly. We are not asking for partnership anymore. We are begging for mercy." Jake stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the orbital platforms where human children played in parks that floated in space, where human scientists pursued research that would have seemed like magic to the Council, where human artists created beauty that transcended anything the galaxy had known before. The Earth of today was not the same world that had served alien masters for 30 years. It was something entirely new and magnificent. "You made a fundamental error," Jake said without turning around. "You assumed that human contributions to your civilization were replaceable. You thought that our engineering was just technical skill, that our medicine was just applied science, that our military expertise was just tactical knowledge." He turned back to face the alien delegation, his expression showing neither anger nor satisfaction, only a kind of tired sadness. "You never understood that what you called human services was actually human civilization. We didn't just work in your hospitals. We created the entire concept of interspecies medicine. We didn't just fight in your wars. We developed the strategies that made galactic defense possible. We didn't just build your technology. We invented the principles that made your entire way of life sustainable." Admiral Carter moved to stand beside Jake, her uniform bearing decorations from battles the aliens had never heard of. "When we left, we didn't abandon our posts," she said. "We took our civilization with us. Everything that kept your society functioning was built on human knowledge and maintained by human expertise. Remove that foundation, and collapse was inevitable." General Hansen gestured toward displays that showed the current state of what had once been Council space. Red zones marked regions under Void Hunter control. Gray areas indicated systems that had gone dark entirely. Yellow sections showed worlds where some form of government still existed, but barely. "This is what your galaxy looks like without human support. This is what you chose when you decided our colonies were expendable." Zethkar fell to his knees, a gesture that caused visible pain as his crystal structure ground against itself. Around him, the other aliens made their own species equivalents of complete submission. They had come prepared to offer anything, to accept any terms, to surrender any dignity if it might convince humanity to save what remained of their civilization. "Please," Zethkar whispered. "We understand that we have no right to ask for your help. We know that our actions caused this catastrophe. But surely human compassion demands that you consider the innocent beings who are suffering for decisions they never made." Jake looked down at the broken alien who had once pronounced judgment on 10 million human civilians without a moment's hesitation. He thought about all the times humans had been asked to sacrifice for the greater good, all the times they had been told that their suffering was necessary for galactic peace, all the times they had been expected to smile and be grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. "Human compassion," Jake repeated slowly. "Yes, we are a compassionate species. We spent 30 years proving that by dying for civilizations that saw us as expendable. We gave you our best and brightest, our most innovative minds, our bravest soldiers. We shared our discoveries and our insights freely, asking only for the chance to build something better together." He walked back to his desk and activated a display that showed the current state of human space. Thousands of worlds now flew Earth's banner, not through conquest but through invitation. Alien refugees who had proven themselves worthy were welcomed into human society, but only after demonstrating genuine respect for human values and capabilities. "But compassion without wisdom is not virtue," Jake continued. "It is weakness that enables abuse. For 30 years we were compassionate to our own detriment, allowing you to exploit our generosity while showing nothing but contempt for our contributions. We learned too late that some relationships cannot be saved, only ended." The alien delegation waited in silence, hoping for some sign that their pleas had moved him. Around them, the office remained quiet except for the soft hum of technology that functioned perfectly, because it had been designed and built by people who understood it completely. Jake sat back down at his desk and looked at each alien representative in turn. These were beings who had once held the power of life and death over billions of humans. They had made decisions that condemned human colonies to resource extraction and human soldiers to pointless deaths. They had dismissed human intelligence as adequate support work while building their entire civilization on human innovations. "Humanity forgives you," Jake said finally. and the aliens felt a moment of hope that was immediately crushed by his next words. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. You wanted to rule the galaxy without us, to enjoy the benefits of our civilization while treating us as servants. You got exactly what you asked for.